and welcome to Varn Blog Solo, and we continue our clarifications. And in this case, we move from the theoretical theoria, the practical praxis, into the creative poiesis. This trilogy of concepts by Aristotle are the things that Aristotle sees as the manifestations of human knowledge in action. And human knowledge is fully human knowledge, the way reason manifests itself through the through seeing by theory and contemplation, by praxis and acting that the realities of that contemplation, and by poiesis, creation. Now, praxis and theoria are super important to Marxism, but poiesis not so much. Poiesis is actually often not discussed that much in left theory, but it is discussed. It shows up through other ways. So while it kind of falls out of the the radical sphere of theory and action, theoria and praxis, poiesis shows up in theories about creation, how people create. Now, remember, it is ironic that these things get used in left circles because these are the kinds of manifestations of rationality, according to Aristotle, that only the freeborn male can have. He actually uh, denies this explicitly in his book, The Politics, as a capacity for slaves, women, and barbarians. Actually, which is much further than, say, Plato. As aristocratic as Plato could be, Plato did not deny women and barbarians the capacity of contemplation. Now, most of the discussions of poiesis actually come out of two places: Heideggerian phenomenology and semiotics. Although a kind of poiesis is super important to cybernetic theory. So we're going to get into that. But first, we have to make sure we understand what we mean by poiesis. There's a lot of concepts that come up. So in antiquity, poiesis means something like to bring forth, to emerge. All right. Heidegger makes a big deal out of this, actually. He talks about poiesis as seen as the blooming of a blossom or the coming forth of a butterfly from a cocoon, and that um, this is super important for him in some ways that we'll come back to. But poiesis basically means to make, right? To create. It is a manifestation of the forms of knowledge. Now, in Aristotle's classification, there are 5 forms of knowledge that pretty much everybody has access to. There's craft, techne, knowledge or conviction, episteme, uh, prudence or morality, phronesis, wisdom, sophia, and intellect, nous. All right. Techne is very practical know-how. It means more than technique, but less than, say, epistemology. It also was something that could be incorporated into praxis. So if you can think about it, techne is the lower form of praxis. Praxis is praxis incorporation. Poiesis is different for Aristotle. Poiesis is a desiring act. It is almost erotic. All right. Why? Is because it has a telos beyond itself. The act of poiesis is to create something, a new thing. It brings something new into the world. All right. Um, this external aim actually has a differentiation in Greek as a thing made as opposed to a thing done. So poiesis is actually something that you go to make something that exists in its own right. It's not just like extrinsically linked for Aristotle. So that's why it's tied to things like poetry. Um, so for example, you wouldn't consider preparing food just to eat it a form of poiesis. But if you are preparing food to create a new and original food as an art, then it would be a form of poiesis. And this distinction really kind of matters. And that's what distinguishes it from techne or even praxis. All right. Praxis doesn't actually aim beyond itself. It aims to incorporate something into itself. Um, in this kind of concern, you can see why Marx is not as concerned with this. Like it doesn't lend itself to the kinds of thinkings about modes of production and whatever that you would have even in praxis and theoria. One can see the truth of the world and the modes of production. One can alter them by practice and incorporation, revolutionary practice being the most effective way, etc. Poiesis is very individual and very motivational. All right. Now, Aristotle's not the only person to talk about poiesis. Um, Actually, the longest discussions on poiesis are not even Aristotle's, they're Plato's. Uh, Plato's Symposium and the Timaeus are all about it. So there's that. Now, classically speaking, there are forms of poiesis that kind of get brought. They're actually, interestingly, not used that much in ancient Greek. Um, there is semiosis, which creates meaning through signs. Mimesis, which is a way of creating through repetition, and autopoiesis, which is self-making, our creation from the self. All right. Autopoiesis is actually invented in 1972 as a concept. It's not in ancient Greek. The biologist and cybernetic theorist Maturana and Varela invented the word in their book Autopoiesis and Cognition. And autopoiesis means self-creating. It creates on its own accord, but it creates something separate from itself. Um, this actually gets, really applied in biology. So, example, mitosis is an example of autopoiesis. This concept is actually really important for uh, cybernetic theory. All right, and I'll quote Montaragna and Varela on this. An autopoietic machine is a machine organized, defined as a unity, as a network of processes of production, transformation, and destruction of components which, through their own interactions and transformations, continuously regenerate and realize the network of processes, relations that produce them, and constitute it. The machine as a concrete unity in space in which the components exist, specifying the topological domain of its realization, such as a network. So this is a self-creating, reinforcing, reinvigorating system. All right. This gets picked up by sociologists like Niklas Luhmann, etc. This is very different from the way poiesis is used in Heidegger. For Heidegger, poiesis is a bringing forth into the world, and there's a tension between ecstasis or ecstasy and poiesis, because poiesis is the moment something emerges. Ecstasis is when something moves away from it standing as one thing to become another. So, for example, uh, there's the poiesis of the bloom, the blooming of the blossom, but when it is blossomed, it goes through a moment of ecstasis and becomes a new thing. Uh, the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. All right. And this is kind of also related to autopoiesis because it's an unfolding of a new thing out of an old thing, becoming something else, as opposed to a thing is, something becomes. All right. You can see here that this is kind of important when one is dealing with like trying to create self-perpetuating systems. And then we add a new category into that as well. This is it's also from cybernetics. And we're going to actually pull from the principle of cybernetica here. There's oleopoiesis, which is a process where an organization producing something other than the organization itself. So this is moving from just autopoiesis into, say, something that exists to create not just itself, but also something else, such as an assembly line that creates automobiles. All right. So these are the way these concepts are used in phenomenology and in cybernetic theory. So what's interesting about this is that since this concept is a concept that is very different than praxis or theoria. Theoria is something that can be brought about to a group of people. Praxis is something that groups of people can do and individuals can do. Poiesis is by its intention separated from other forms of work, such as techne, crafts, or any of the other actually kinds of arriving at truth. Even you remember the 5 ways that Aristotle says you can arrive at truth: techne, episteme, phronesis, sophia, and nous are craft, conviction, prudence, wisdom, and intellect. These poiesis is not about arriving at truth, it's about making something true. And it can be symbolically, as in semiotics, or it can be completely new, right? That distinction probably does not sit well with a lot of Marxists who consider labor as important as the intention of labor. Um, because one of the things that if you think about like use value and abstract value, poiesis as a concept is about something beyond either use value or accept or, or abstract value. It's about the generation of something new and total. And thus, I think we can see why it gets left out of so many left-wing conversations about these concepts, because we use theoria and praxis all the time, but we drop poiesis out. Maybe it's not useful. Um, I'm a poet. It's something that I do. And the poet aims to create something new out of things that already exist and does so through the use of semiosis, signs. So I obviously care about this, but is it useful as a social category? I don't know. You tell me. Um, but I do bring it up because it is part of the theories in cybernetics. And if you understand its origins or the way Heidegger discusses it, its use in cybernetics actually becomes somewhat clearer that these are ways of creating systems that can maintain themselves and recreate themselves within themselves. So and even create new things. All right. And that's a very intentional process for the cybernetic theorist, although it happens within systems in nature naturally. And things like, I mean, literally the example that Mauritania and Varela use is like mitosis, cell reproduction, etc. And even in Heideggerian examples, we see that the natural world and the becoming of one thing into another is part of the concept for Heidegger. Anyway, something to think about as we move on. We are through with these 3 Aristotelian categories. We're going to have one more clarification, and I'm going to talk about the ancient concept of pedagogy and its use today. Take care.